Hey everyone. One of the most crucial aspects to being a business analyst is knowing what requirements are, how to elicit, and how to document them. And that sounds pretty simple, right? But there is a huge piece of what business analysts do, and it's all about learning how you can communicate with people, how you can ask the right questions to elicit requirements and document them out, so then that end result, that end product, is something that the business can utilize and it meets all the needs of the particular project. So this series of lectures is going to be all about the requirements, and then we'll go into a future series where we get into a little bit more of actually eliciting the requirements. So this first series is going to be talking high level about what requirements are and why they're important. So again, it's all about the requirements, baby. All right, so maybe a little corny, but P. Diddy had it wrong. It's not all about the Benjamins. It's actually all about the requirements. But the requirements are what get business analysts paid. So let's get started. First off, why do you need requirements? Why are they important? Why am I creating a whole series of lectures simply on requirements? Well, the number one thing is the requirements are guiding that design of the eventual solution. Requirements are dictating what the business needs and what they want, and ensures that the solution that's given to them in the end will meet their needs and will solve for the problem of basically the reason that they've started up this project. And the other key thing is, without correct requirements, you cannot design or build the correct product. So it kind of goes hand in hand. If you don't have the correct requirements, you can't write the correct design. And if you don't have the right design, you can't build the product in the end to meet the needs. So it all starts with the requirements. If those go south, if those are a failure, the project is probably going to be a failure. 60% of projects fail because of requirements. So whether that's a business analyst that maybe doesn't have a lot of experience and they're missing some key aspects, or the requirements are written down incorrectly or wrong, or they're just poor requirements and they're not meeting the standards of what makes a good requirement. So what I'll be talking about is really getting into and showing you all of the different aspects of what requirements are, how you can elicit them, how you can take some knowledge from here and apply it directly to the projects that you work on, as well as what makes up a good requirement, and ensuring that you're following those standards that we'll set here in the next few lectures. So the next thing is, what is a requirement? Simply, it's something a product must do or a quality it must have. So a requirement sounds very simple. Then we're going to go through some examples as we kind of walk a little further. So there's some different categories of requirements. You can have functional requirements, which are kind of the key requirements that you think of when you think of a requirement. Basically, that the system shall do something. The system needs to do something. I need to be able to see our current quantity of inventory for a particular product, right? So that would be written out. The system shall show real-time inventory of toothbrushes. All right, so there you go. That's a requirement. And so that's a functional requirement, a function of the system. The next one is a non-functional requirement, or also known as a supplemental requirement. These requirements are a little bit harder to define, but they are going to give you have you talking about things that aren't really easy to see, maybe talking about the security or the interface of the particular product. And then the third one is constraints. Constraints are what's gonna kind of hold it back, and what are the key things you need to keep in mind as you're working through to work through the next phase, which is design. And we'll dig into each of these categories in the next few slides and give you a better understanding of exactly what I'm talking about. So first off, the functional requirements. It's things a product must do or action the product must take. Non-functional requirements are properties or qualities the product must have and how the product will behave. And then constraints are global requirements, so the purpose of the project, as well as users of the product. They are actually constraints. So let's start off with product constraints. This is one that's a little bit at a higher level, so I want to start here to make it a little bit easier to understand. So the first thing is, here are all the different sections that could be, or types of requirements that could be considered product constraints. First off, the purpose of the product. So what's the reason you're building that product? In an earlier lecture, we talked about the business objective and understanding what their needs are and making sure that you have a measurable baseline going towards that. So understanding that what those business needs are, what that problem is, what the purpose of the product is a product constraint, and it is a requirement that should be documented within your requirements document. The next thing is client, customer, and stakeholders. So people that are interacting with that product, they are considered constraints. So you need to understand who is going to be interacting with the product. Users of the product. So this is the intended end users and how they affect the product usability. So maybe you are talking about cashiers working with a point of sale type of software system. Okay, they're going to be a constraint. They're users of the product. You have to take into consideration their technical aptitude and how familiar they're going to be with this type of system, as well as, okay, they're going to be face-to-face with a customer. You want to make sure that the interface is kind of conducive to that. So it just kind of helps to understand what those users are. You can help drive out further requirements and design requirements. Next thing is requirement constraints, so limitations of the project and restrictions on design. Next thing is naming conventions, so vocabulary of the product. As you work through certain naming conventions of maybe how the business terms something or utilizes a certain word or vocabulary, that needs to be documented and consistent throughout the product. The next thing is relevant facts, so outside influences that make a difference to this product. Assumptions. So product constraints also include assumptions that developers and designers are going to make about the product. So you want to call those out, what that assumption is and how it's going to potentially affect the design. So those are product constraints. Here's some examples. The product budget must not exceed $50,000. So there you go. That's a product constraint that we have a limited budget for this particular product and we can't exceed $50,000. Pretty simple. The next thing is the product shall run on the company's existing machines. So as part of the budget, they don't have any ability to buy additional hardware. So they need to be able to have it run on the existing machines. Very important to know as you are, when you get into that design phase and understanding what you're going to build, you can't go build some super high-end product if the machines can't handle it. So you have to make sure you understand that constraint. Implementation of the product cannot interrupt daily business. Great requirement to have. That's going to help a little bit later down the line as you get more towards your implementation, but definitely something you want to note up front as a constraint of the particular product and the project. And then the last one, the last example I have here is the last 5 years of historical data needs to be made available in the product. So this is talking about if you had a different system and you're moving to another product, they're saying that the last 5 years need to be pulled over, and that is absolutely a constraint that needs to be built for and it needs to be designed for as part of the project. So those are product constraints. I hope that makes a little bit of sense and kind of defining out what those are. The next one we're going to go into is the most common type of requirement, category of requirement rather, and that is functional requirements. So the functional requirements are the scope of the product. It's defining the boundaries and the connections to other products. So what I mean by that is defining where would this product fit in and what are we really looking to tackle. So if the current project is talking about we're going to just have leads and opportunities as part of our product, and we're going to be having marketing generate leads and get them into the product, and then we're going to have our salespeople work those leads, and when they get a qualified lead, they're going to turn that into an opportunity and work it through an opportunity process. So now we've kind of defined leads and opportunities, and then we have some reports and other things that are part of the scope of the product. Well, now understanding that functional requirements shouldn't be falling outside the boundaries of that. We shouldn't be talking about doing some type of quoting or product engagement inside of the product if that's not part of the scope. So scope of the product, our functional requirements. It helps define what that scope is. The second part is functional and data requirements. So these are the things the product must do and the data that will be manipulated by the different functions. So, okay, when these certain things happen, or at night these certain procedures need to run, and the data needs to be handled in a certain way and maybe acted in a certain way based on findings. So if a lead has been in the system for more than 6 months and hasn't been contacted, we need to automatically close out that lead, right? So we could write some requirements to help define that functional and data pieces with the functional requirements. So let's go through some examples of what a functional requirement is. The product must track recipes down to the ingredient and quantity level. So that's a function of the system. It needs to be able to allow for that tracking down to the ingredient and quantity level. The recipes must be editable by an administrator. All right, that's important, right? We need to know that the recipes have to be editable by an admin, so that has to be built into the design. The product must display the orders that need to be completed. All right, so some type of display. So that's good to know as well. The product must display the recipes to make the orders. All right, so now I'm kind of picturing that there's a baker, likely, that's looking at the screen. They need to be able to see the recipes that need to be made that day and the ingredients that go into each of those recipes. The product must track ingredients, including their cost, vendors, and quantity in inventory. All right, so that's great to know. It's got to track that. And the product must interact with the current point of sale system. So these are requirements, and if you've been in additional or earlier, paid attention to earlier lectures, this goes along with the Dolicious pastry example that we've talked about, and that's where they're building a system to take over and track some of their recipes, ingredients, and help kind of work through the whole shopping experience, making sure they have the right ingredients for those particular products. So those are functional requirements. Don't worry if this isn't quite sinking in yet. We're kind of going over the categories fairly quickly. We will be touching on this numerous times throughout the next couple lectures. Last but not least is the non-functional requirements, also known as supplemental requirements. So there's a bunch of different types of these. These are the look and feel requirements, so intended appearance. If you want a certain color scheme, that would be a non-functional requirement. Maybe you have to use the company's colors. That's a non-functional requirement, but it's something that has to be noted. Usability requirements. So those intended users, we kind of talked about the experience level of users, how technically aptitude, their technical aptitude, or maybe how familiar they are with using systems, or what they're doing with that system. Those are non-functional requirements to understand that, okay, they're looking at customers, so that they maybe need, big buttons on there. So that's a non-functional requirement that need to be accounted for when it's designed. Performance requirements. How fast, big, accurate, safe, and reliable does this system need to be? Do we need to have a 100% uptime? Okay, well, that needs to be noted as a supplemental or non-functional requirement. Does it need to be accurate? Is that the most important thing as we're rolling through some analytics maybe on a particular system, that it needs to go down to the thousandth level of a number, or kind of what that is? So those are all non-functional requirements. Operational requirements. So the product's intended operating environment, where it's going to be operating. It's going to be operating on the current machines that are Windows 8 and et cetera, et cetera. So the operational requirements. Maintainability and portability requirements. How adaptable does the product need to be and for it to be changed? Is this something that's going to be built upon and it needs to be able to kind of have additional plugins and features added in easily? Also, does it need to be able to be moved around? Do we need to have potentially multiple locations? So it needs to take into the account that there's going to be multiple locations working in this system. Security requirements. Who has access to what, and how confidential does the data need to be? Culture and political requirements, so different human factors. Legal requirements. Conformance to applicable laws. So if you need to, if you're capturing credit card data and that data needs to be removed in a certain amount of time to be within applicable laws for holding credit card data, that would be a non-functional or supplemental requirement. So those are the main non-functional requirements. So let's look at some examples. The product shall use company colors and logos. We kind of talked about that a little bit, but the look and feel of that particular product. The product shall be intuitive, even to first-time users. So this is saying, okay, we're not going to have people that are used to working within systems, and it needs to be very intuitive and helpful. So there needs to be some design considerations around that. The product shall only allow bakers and administrators to view recipes. Okay, there's some security roles there, and so those are all supplemental requirements. The product shall be easily upgraded for future business needs. All right? Makes sense? And the product shall be scalable to multiple bakery locations. So we kind of touched on a few of those, but that is really helping you to define out, and really you're trying to give as much information as you can possibly gather that will be good information and necessary to ensure that the design of the solution ends up meeting all of these requirements that are being laid out for you. So that's it on kind of an overview of requirements. That gives you a very high level about what a requirement is, why it's important to have it, and the three main categories of requirements being functional requirements, non-functional or supplemental requirements, and constraints. So I hope that's helped. We'll go into more details in the next lectures.